G'day, dear viewers, and welcome back to another episode of the infamous Shapira Saga and his 16 leather strips. Ross and Jono with you once again, and we are working our way through our textbook, of course, the Moses Scroll by your fine self, Ross, and we are in, oh, by the way, for those who don't know, if you don't have it, available at Amazon in hardcover, paperback, Kindle, and now audio. So
however you like
grab it there. However you like it, with icing on top. And we are in chapter 8 now. And this is halfway through the height of the fame of the 16 leather strips. We're in London.
Yep.
Dr. Christian David Ginsburg continues his analysis and translation of the scroll. He's taking his sweet, sweet time, Ross. And during that time, and people getting a little restless because they're like, "Come on, dude, are you going to tell us the thing?" But he's like, "No, I'm just going to translate. I'm just going to leak it out to the press. This, that, and the other few details. I'm not going to say anything about whether I think it's authentic or not." And he's taking a long time. Well,
he's playing it. Wait, he's playing it perfectly. It's like he has the world eating out of his hand. They're waiting with bated breath every week.
This is exactly what is happening, and he's loving it. He's absolutely loving it, because not only is the scroll experiencing the height of its fame in this hour, but he is as well. He is right there in the spotlight with it. So this is the way that, if I may, I want to kick off, because I love the way that you start this chapter.
All right.
Chapter 8, On Display Before the World is the title of this chapter. As the second week of Ginsburg's analysis came to an end, with public interest on the rise, 2 leather strips were placed on display in a poorly lit glass case in the King's Library of the British Museum. Each day, between the hours of 10 and 4, under the watchful eye of an assigned guard, crowds of people visited the exhibit to cast their eyes upon the celebrated scroll fragments.
Mm-hmm.
On Monday, the 13th of August, Ross, British Prime Minister William Gladstone took the opportunity to examine the display. All right, so it is of such fame that the British Prime Minister says, hey, book me a private screening. I need to go and see this for myself. And they do that for him on the 13th of August. He says, according to what's this, the London Standard?
Yeah.
London Standard reported that during his visit, the Prime Minister discussed the scroll with Ginsburg and Shapira. Gladstone reportedly commented on the similarity of the script, the fragments, with those of the Mesha Stela and the Salom inscription, indicating his familiarity with the details, if only from an informed lay perspective.
Right. Let me jump in. Before you read that, we actually, so when we read the newspaper article, this reporter who's describing, he's standing with pencil and pad as he sees the Prime Minister meet with both Shapira and Ginsburg. Now remember, one of the things that we know from just reading between the lines almost, reading the accounts, Ginsburg doesn't come out very often. He is in there at work on this scroll. He is fascinated. He's in deep. And if you're Shapira and you want to talk to him, you've got to kind of get him an appointment. But when the Prime Minister, imagine the Prime Minister comes out, they both meet with the Prime Minister, and the reporter takes notes. He overhears the Prime Minister saying, this is interesting. Look at the script. It looks very similar in some ways, does it not, to what we saw in the Moabite Stone and the Salom inscription. So he's there witnessing all this. I think that this is fascinating, and I want to make one point before you continue. Ginsburg is drawing a 500-pound, he's been forwarded a 500-pound stipend for his work on the Masorah from Gladstone.
Right.
And so they're not only friends or acquaintances, and he knows that the Prime Minister values his work. Look, if he thought, this is going into the second full week of his examination, if he thought that it was fake, you would think he would say to the Prime Minister, hey, look, I'm sorry, Prime Minister, but I have to tell you.
Don't get too excited.
Don't get too excited. This thing, we're about to bust this wide open. but he
Mm.
doesn't. Now that tells me, now this is a guy who has the ability and has followed up and given you 500 pounds, roughly 60,000 US dollars in today's money. So anyway, I think he
No, that's a really good
believes it's
point.
authentic at this point, or he would have said something.
It's an invested relationship, is what you're saying, and
Yep.
you don't want to jeopardize that. That's a lot of money back in the day. So if there was, you don't want the Prime Minister to have egg on his face, and the reporter's about to report
That's
whatever,
right.
in the hearing of. So absolutely, it's a really good point. I
Yep.
hadn't thought of that.
Yep.
But I just want to read what the reporter added. It says, and you've recorded here, the battle which is now waxing hot, and this is from the London Standard.
Yep.
The battle which is now waxing hot, I love that,
I do
among
too.
Orientalists will be the renewal of the old war of the Moabite Stone. Just elaborate on what is meant there, the old war of the Moabite Stone. This is only a few years earlier, right?
Yeah, that's right. It was from 1868, and there was this very, a lot of people don't realize it now because most consider that it's a solved point that the Moabite Stone is authentic. But in the day, in 1868, 1869, 1870, 71, 72, there's a debate raging on that is it authentic? What do we know about it? There were people who were impatient. This is another point. People are impatient because they're waiting on Clermont-Ganneau, who is supposedly putting out this authoritative work on. It is a balagan, as we call it in Hebrew. It is a mess, and so that's what this guy is reporting on here. It's a hot mess. It reminds me of the same stuff that happened in 1868. That's what he's talking about. Yep.
All right. Yeah. The question is partly one of paleography. Obsolete words and words regarded as late appear. Among those who hold that the manuscript is genuine, the divergency of opinion as to the date is very great. Some 8th century, some the time of the captivity, while a third party places it to be the Maccabean period.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Okay, so that's where it's at. Everyone is waiting, like you said, everyone's eating out of the palm of the hand of Dr. Christian David Ginsburg, waiting for him to indicate which way he's going to go as to whether it is authentic.
Yeah, so if we were to stop here, Shapira's on the top of his world. He's on the top of his game. He's left Germany. In Germany, there are some scholars there who feel certain that it's authentic. He's got that under his belt. He knows that Goethe, Meyer, and Ehrman all believed in it. He probably knows that Lepsius, Richard Lepsius, the man from whom we acquired the Book of the Dead, the slogan, the Book of the Dead, famous Egyptologist, that we learn, and I found a letter in an archive that is from Lepsius where he says he believed it. So we've got this group of Germans who believe it. We've got some Germans who don't believe it. But here he's in England, and he really, remember, he roped in some of these became convinced in England in his meeting that he had in late July. So, and now the Prime Minister has come to see it. Now, in Miriam Harry's book, she reports of the heyday he's the hero of the hour. We talked about this a little bit last week. People interview, they want to talk to him, and they've fantasized about his shop in the Middle East. He's at the top of the world. But while his fame is on the rise, Jono Vandor, so is a storm brewing. A storm is brewing. You can see black, ominous clouds rising in the form of an academic rebuttal. That's right. That's right. Yep.
Yeah, and it's approaching.
It's
coming.
Getting
bigger, and the winds are starting to.
And lightning is striking. It's everywhere. Oh, yeah.
The thunder is rumbling from a distance, and it's getting closer.
Yep.
It is doing so in the form of two major scholars. And the first one we're going to talk about is Adolf Neubauer, Hungarian-born, one of my guys, from Austrian Consul of Jerusalem, an Oxford scholar, stated his doubts concerning the scroll's authenticity without seeing them. Basically, he didn't get to analyze them.
Nope.
He didn't get to So, and he's so bold, Ross. Just remind me, he's so bold that he even says, "Oh, as soon as I heard about them, I wrote them off."
I knew it was fake. I knew it was fake from the get-go. Yep. Let me tell you about this Neubauer. No, one quick point.
Because before, just off the air, you were reminding me that these two scholars that we're going to talk about, these two ominous clouds that are approaching,
yep,
have a history and have been rubbed up the wrong way by Shapira in the past. How so with Neubauer?
Look, I tell you, here's one other to set the stage for this controversy between the academics, between the Shapira scroll and the academic biblical academia. What we've got behind the scenes is something quite interesting. So first off, last week, and I mean in 1883, the week prior to this storm gathering, it was already brewing, and Ginsburg knew it. Ginsburg said in the Athenaeum, he said, listen, I highly recommend that before people weigh in, that they really invest the time and study this document. And it's only fair to the manuscript and to Shapira, because he's staring at it all day, every day. They even went so far as to put a fragment on display. But some of these scholars, and this happens to this day, Jono, some of these scholars sit at their desk and they fire shots, it's fake, it's fake, it's fake. And all Shapira and Ginsburg are saying is, hey, invest the time and energy to take a look at this. So quickly, here's what, going back to the point that we were talking about before the show tonight, these two, Neubauer and Sayce, to me, they're kind of like a little couple, like Abbott and Costello. They're buddies, they're friends, they're a tag team, and they together not only I don't think they like Shapira. And I know that even if you could say, well, you might be embellishing or you might be taking this a bit further than the evidence, but let me tell you why I say that. Back in 1881, remember the Siloam inscription is discovered in 1880. It's first announced in June of 1880, but it really doesn't hit the press, as we say, until February of 1881. Now, from the very beginning, February of 1881, Shapira is involved in the decipherment of that inscription. And so now also in February of 1881, you have Archibald Sayce. Now, let me say this. Archibald Sayce is, from what I can read and understand, a brilliant scholar and linguist. He's said to have known some 20 languages fluently. The guy was really off the chart. But he arrives in Jerusalem in February of 1881 and quickly wants to be the first guy to publish what does it say, what does it mean, So he starts pumping out the articles. Now there are pros and cons to being the first person. In this case, he publishes first, and he gets some criticism from the Jerusalem team. So, and this is going to kind of wrap this part up, but by May of 1881, Hermann Goethe is working in Jerusalem on the Siloam inscription. Conrad Schick has been on it the whole time. Remember, it's his student, Yaakov Eliyahu, who discovers it, and Shapira. Now, Claude Condor, who's going to come more into our story today, shows up. He's been absent from the Holy Land for quite a few years, actually, but he shows up on May the 28th, 1881, and he meets with the Jerusalem team. And guess what they tell him? They say, listen, we think that Sayce is premature in his interpretation of the Siloam inscription, and he's going to be proven wrong. And Condor says, how so? That's my Condor voice, how so? And so then they begin to tell him, and here is what Condor writes to the PEF, and it's ultimately published. Let's see what page that's on. I think it's, let me see if I can find it in my book really quickly. Yeah, he says, let me look at my notes real quick, John. Oh, here we go. Sorry. It's page 31 in my book. This is important, though. I wanted to catch this. Mr. Shapira, this is Condor writing, Mr. Shapira gives a different interpretation to the text, meaning the Siloam inscription, explaining it as referring to the cutting of the tunnel from two opposite ends. This, we know, was really how the excavation was effected, and Mr. Shapira's intimate acquaintance with the Hebrew idiom as a Talmudist of 20 years' education seems to render his opinion worthy of consideration. So he says two things. One, Condor, and the word gets out in the academic community that Condor, the scholar, famous soldier scholar, says Sayce is wrong and Shapira is right. So what happens after that point is Sayce and his buddy, Neubauer, start attacking Shapira in the press. So by July, there's an all-out fight. July of 1881, they're fighting in the newspapers, these two picking on Shapira.
So are you telling me, okay, so now I know about Condor endorsing Shapira's interpretation of Sayce's. And I know that that puts Sayce's nose out of joint. I know that eventually he concedes and says, well, Goethe was right.
Goethe was right.
Yeah, never, because he cannot bring himself to acknowledge that someone without all the many degrees and so on and so forth was right over Sayce. So he attributes it to Goethe. Okay, fine. But you're telling me that both Sayce and Neubauer are tag teaming?
Yes, and let me give you one piece of evidence that really sealed it for me. So I was reading every newspaper account because I'm working on the Siloam inscription, and I was really preparing for the talk at the Albright in Jerusalem back in February of last year, I guess. And so one of the things I found is that Sayce, at one point later, this is how I know he still got his I started to say something that probably isn't appropriate, but he's all he's uppity about this, and he's still kind of upset about it because he says this. He goes, perhaps Shapira ought to stick. You got to put your nose in there. Shapira ought to stick with Talmudic literature. See, so he's still mad that Condor said Shapira's right, because he's a Talmudist of 20 years. And Sayce is like, he better stick with that and selling souvenirs, leave this to the big boys. And this is what they did. So Shapira had two things quickly to remind everyone, two things about Siloam inscription that he got right that no one else got right at the time. Still hadn't been credited for it yet. Number one, Shapira said, hey, this inscription is telling the story of how the tunnel was made. The diggers are coming from both sides. And see, Condor says, we know that's how it was done. How do we know that? Because Robinson already figured this out. Archaeology had already determined that's how it was made. But no one in July of 1881 said this other than Shapira. Number two, Shapira said that line 5 did not say, as everyone else read it, 1,000 cubits, but 1,200 cubits. And this is where Neubauer and Sayce both attacked him. Neubauer said, that's not even biblical. 200 and 1,000.
200 and 1,000.
You can't put the hundreds before the thousands in biblical literature. Everybody knows that. So anyway, and it turns out he was wrong. But see, this little tag team, these scholars who, they want to pick at Shapira, they're wrong.
So they see this as an opportunity to have their revenge. And they are, as you say, there is pros and cons to being first. There's only either you are right or you are wrong. If you're right and you're first, then the glory of the heavens will shine upon you from the academic world. If, however, you are wrong, as Sayce was during the Siloam inscription translation, interpretation, then it can be embarrassing. And he's still carrying that embarrassment, that egg on his face, but he's willing to risk it again.
Yep.
And even Neubauer says, look, haven't really looked at it, haven't really investigated it, but it's got to be fake, and these are the reasons why. Now, he goes into some detail, Ross.
He does.
He seems heavily invested in recovering some sort of academic pride for himself. Tell us about his letter.
Yeah, I will. And one thing I wanted to add quickly is I've actually had people write me and say, you shouldn't put these two guys down. These scholars, their reputation is known, and they're great guys.
Scholars,
let me tell you, I agree with that. But look, I'm here to represent Mr. Shapira in this situation, and for years his name has been smeared in the mud, and undeservedly so. So anyway, now having said that, my hat's off. All respect that is due go to Neubauer and Sayce. Having said that, one of the things that they have a problem with, particularly Neubauer, in his response, first of all, I think this is funny now, because he says he is citing examples of why it's not right, and he criticized, Neubauer does, this is page 60 of my book, the inclusion of certain ungrammatical usages. All right, so he's looking at the Hebrew of this, I believe, ancient document, and what is he doing, Jono? He's comparing the grammar and the syntax with what he knows from a medieval text. In other words, he's got on one side, he has the Masoretic text, and that is a medieval arranged text. So here you've got an ancient text, and if it doesn't agree with your medieval text, it's wrong. And so listen, he goes, evidently, this is Neubauer, the Moabite writer did not make use of Dr. Driver's excellent work on the Hebrew tenses. You have to say that, kind of tongue-in-cheek. He's being a smart aleck. He's joking in a way, but he's serious. In other words, he's saying, we know how Hebrew verbal stems work. We know how you're supposed to use these verbs in context. And this writer, the Moabite Deuteronomy writer, could have used, I think this is ridiculous, but it's his point. He's serious. If he would have had, and by the way, I have Dr. Driver's book from this particular book, is from 1874. It was the standard at the time. So he's really upset about this. And then he does go on to say, this is another point that he makes, he says this, he intended to pass the scroll off as an early recension of the text by his use of Elohim instead of Jehovah. This is his argument. In other words, he's saying, Neubauer is saying, I see what the guy did. The Moabite writer, i.e. the forger, wanted us to believe that it was ancient, and he substituted, instead of Yehovah or Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the Tetragrammaton, with Elohim, because he's saying that this forger wants us to believe that this document comes before the name came into use. Then
I had to laugh at this.
I did.
I had to laugh at this because this is funny. Let me read it. So this quote is certainly the cleverest thing in the New Deuteronomy, as it turns the fragments into an Elohist text, claimed Neubauer. Quote, unfortunately, the Moabite Moses had blundered because, according to what was published in the Times, the name Jehovah appears twice in the scroll.
Yeah.
I don't understand why this is even controversial. Is it not perfectly evident that you have an introduction, like a library note of the scribe at the beginning and at the end? Is it really that hard to comprehend that these were added before and after and during a Yahwist era when that particular name was quite dominant?
Well,
I don't understand how we can.
Yeah, we know of what we call colophon. We know that a lot of documents, even in our Bible today, it'll say, these are the words that Moses spoke, Deuteronomy 1:1. These are the words of Isaiah, the son of Amoz, who was reigned in the, So we get introductory comments from scribes from antiquity. But Neubauer makes this bold and ridiculous claim, like if I'm a forger, or if this was a forged document, you don't think the forger would have said, let's imagine, here we go, imagine everyone, I'm a forger and I go, okay, I want to make this an Elohist text. So what am I going to do? I'm going to use text which would say Yod-He Vav-He, the Tetragrammaton, but instead, I'll use forms of Elohim and not use Jehovah. And then I start to write it, and I start off with, these are the words which Moses spoke on the other side according to the mouth of Jehovah. Oh, man, I messed up.
It's too late.
Never mind. I'll leave it in there. Nobody will notice. Come on.
No one notice.
It's clearly.
And then finishing.
Yeah. Now,
it really is. It's very, very clear.
Yeah, and by the way, your point exactly. Shapira also he stopped in his tracks when he noticed that the text, this document that came into his possession in 1878, he recognizes that it is almost the whole of the text is an Elohist document, but the introductory line and the closing line both contain Jehovah. And so he says, what he assumes that someone, a later scribe, added to an earlier text, put the name Jehovah, which was by that point known. But he also takes it further. He says, if we take the text minus the introductory sentence, the closing sentence, could it be that the body of this manuscript, this Moabite Deuteronomy, maybe it was from a people group who only knew or only used the name Elohim and not Jehovah, or the title Elohim, not Jehovah? And he wrestles with this, and he says, could it be that this is so early that it was from that time, and then a later Jehovistic scribe added the entry in?
Scribe came and added it in. Now, this is something that you and I have spoken about before, just as, on a side note. For example, between the text or the comparison of identical text or almost identical text between the book of Kings, and maybe Second Samuel, and the book of Chronicles.
Yeah.
Where it very clearly appears that a Yahwistic writer has inserted the name into the text.
Right.
And there is what is the book called that we often refer back to for as a textbook there?
It's actually on my website.
Right there.
It's called A Synoptic. I have it right here. I almost sleep with this book. It's called A Synoptic Harmony of Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles by James D. Newsom. Yeah, it's a fantastic book. What scholars were beginning, I say beginning, some scholars, we have records back to the 1700s where scholars are beginning to really question and critically, carefully, I could say, look at the text of the Hebrew Bible. But they were beginning to note these different writers. In fact, it's very close to this time that Wellhausen takes the work of previous scholars like Graf and puts it together in his book, detailing what is known now, even to this day, is still a very strongly supported by many scholars, the documentary hypothesis. But if you put all of that aside, and because Shapira's not talking about the documentary hypothesis, he's familiar with it because he's read Bleek's work. But it's like, could this really be an Elohist document? So what happens is that this is the one thing, in fact, Neubauer calls this the cleverest thing about the document. Now remember, he's not seen pictures. There were no pictures. There's not been anything at this point published about it really showing the drawings, so he can't get anything from that. He's only going by one publication one transcription piece, maybe two by this point, that Ginsburg has published in the Athenaeum and the Times.
Yep.
So, but he's sitting in his office, fat and happy, eating cheese puffs and drinking Hawaiian punch, and he's commenting on what Ginsburg is looking at in the face, right?
So listen. So where has Neubauer published this report?
I think it's in the Times. I think he's going to the Times. Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Because the Times is what he's responding to, the articles in the Time. But what we see, the Times plural, what we see at the time is that these are almost syndicated reports. They're published in the Jewish Chronicle, the Times of London, the Athenaeum. The PEF is picking up what's published in the Times, but it's going around the world. Papers in Australia, papers in the U.S., New York Times. In 1883,
everybody informed.
Yeah, everybody's reading this.
So he sees this opportunity as not just to take a swipe at Shapira, but also to gain a little bit of the limelight that Ginsburg is enjoying. And to your point earlier on, that he and Stacey are tag teaming.
Yeah.
On the same day, Ross, Archibald Henry Stacey also made his opinion known.
Oh yeah.
So how does he differ? Does he go further, or is he just reiterating what Neubauer has already said?
Oh no, he can't just go with what Neubauer says. Stacey. I feel like I know these people. So if Stacey's great-great-granddaughter's listening, please don't get mad that I'm talking about your pawpaw. But I think I know him better than you do, friend. So I really do. I get to know these characters. And Stacey comes across, particularly in dealing with Shapira, all these scholars, they look at him in a condescending way, and they're arrogant and they're pompous. And there are a few other words that I could think of, but they constantly hammer on Shapira, and so, but they do it with this sense of like they know so much more, and they're so incredibly gifted and talented. And Shapira, he's a Jew that runs a souvenir shop, for God's sake. Why would you listen to him? So they're really. So here's what Stacey comes up with. Stacey, now this is almost comical to me, because Shapira punked him out, if you know what that term means, punked him out on the Siloam inscription some time back, and now he's going to use the Siloam inscription to make a point against this scroll. Here's what he says. The discovery of the Siloam inscription, this is Stacey, what has shown that these were not the characters used in Judah, and therefore presumably in the northern kingdom of Israel in the pre-exilic period. Consequently, if the fragments were genuine, they would belong to a Moabite and not a Jewish book of Deuteronomy, and the opening verse of the book would contain the name of Chemosh and not of Yahweh or Jehovah. You see? So he is...
Wait. Does it not start by identifying the location of the scribe? And it's on the west side of the Jordan?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But, okay. Right.
No, it's like they ignore what they want to ignore. They bring up what they want to bring up, and so he's now talking about the letter forms. And so he's associating the letter forms with Moabite writing, this paleo, but it's Moabite. And so it's again, these two guys are like joking. They don't have Twitter or anything, but I bet they're sitting together at Oxford going, hey, look what I wrote. Oh, that's a good one. I wish I would have put that in my report. Let me see that again, Stacey. Oh, that's high five, baby. So they're teaming, they're tag teaming. But look, then this is my favorite part, because the brilliant Archibald Stacey, and he really is, he's just a jerk to Shapira, but this is what I love. I think there ought to be a sign next to a library dedicated to him or something. Stacey also found it very difficult to believe the story of an ancient scroll's discovery in a cave near the Dead Sea, Jono. Who could imagine?
Let me.
Go ahead.
I just want to read it in a British accent, if I may.
Perfect. But look, do your nose in the air a little bit. Like, go ahead.
Okay, it sounds like this. This is Stacey. It really is demanding too much of Western credulity to ask us to believe that in a damp climate like that of Palestine, any sheepskin could have lasted 3,000 years, either above the ground or under it, even though they may have been abundantly salted with asphalt from the Vale of Siddim itself.
I love that. That is perfect. That's him. You channeled.
That's him.
You just channeled Archibald Stacey. Nothing. You talk about challenging Western credulity. Nothing could be as funny to me, knowing as well as we now know the story of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. He would have been doing backflips in his grave if someone would have gone to his grave. Maybe I'll do this one day and say, hey, listen to this. I'm going to read to you the story of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Are you ready? Listen up. I mean, it's so perfect. So perfect. Now, the next thing they do is, so both of them laugh, ha ha, giggle, giggle. No way could a scroll be written on leather that could survive, because Neubauer says the same thing. The verb tenses are wrong because guess what? This is the same thing that that the other scholars, from Delitzsch to Schlotman, everyone who's criticized this says it doesn't match our Old Testament. Look, we have the Bible. This is what fundamentalists always say. How could you possibly say that your document is older than mine? And I would say, well, maybe because the oldest complete Masoretic text that we know of today, the oldest complete, is 1008 of the Common Era. Dead Sea Scrolls go back another 1100 years earlier than that. I don't expect, and now we know, academics know now, that orthography, spelling, grammar, things were different in that ancient world than they were by the time of the writing of the Masoretes. So anyway, here's what they also next move to. You want to, let's do the geography. That's another point.
Right, because this is the point that Condon makes, right?
Yep.
And he makes this point to Besant, does he not? Fill us in.
Yeah, it's what's happened is I pull this quote in because Besant in his autobiography recalls that after the grand show at the PEF headquarters, when Shapira laid before the scholars of England his manuscripts, Condor, according to Besant's autobiography, pulled him aside and he said, you might want to do this do it in an English accent. Look at 62, I observe. End of the first paragraph, see?
End of the first paragraph.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just looking here. So this is Condor.
Yep.
And it. Hang on. I observe. This is Besant. It's Condor remarking to Besant.
Yep.
I observe that all points objected to by the German critics have vanished in this new and epoch-making travail. The geography is not confused, and Moses does not record his own death.
Right. See, so he notices and calls attention to what he sees as points that could be construed as validating of this document. So here's what this statement tells us. Now, some of our viewers might not know this. They may say, well, I don't like where this is going, boys, but if you study the route in Deuteronomy, what you see is that the geography in Deuteronomy chapter 1 is confused. And it doesn't agree, in my view, and many others who have carefully studied this, it does not also agree or neither does it agree with the route that is listed in Numbers chapter 33, for instance. Numbers 33 is a record of we call it journeyings, or the stops along the way of the wilderness journey, according to the book of Bamidbar, book of Numbers. But so those don't agree. So there are problems in Deuteronomy chapter 1, actually 1 through 3, which is sort of a travel log with a little bit of narrative mixed in. But what's interesting, though, is he says, this document, it makes sense geographically. You can follow the steps. You don't have the children of Israel backtracking and going to a place that's east or west of the other place and then tracking and
the zigzagging that goes on.
Right. So, for instance, Shapira has stressed this point too. And he writes in a letter to Herman Strock, remember May 9th, before he made his journey to Germany, he writes to Strock, "No displaced passages are to be met in our manuscript, especially in a topographical point of view. The order of the last journeys and battles are in the best order." And then he goes through and he says, so it begins in Seir, then it goes here, and then it goes here, and then it goes here. And he shows, and by the way, I've looked at this closely. I encourage others to look at it. Take Deuteronomy 1. This is the way I tell students of mine all the time. Draw a line down the middle of the paper. Put Deuteronomy 1 at the top left, and then Shapira manuscript top right. And then you just list the order and look at it and look at a map. It's not hard. It's not hard. And see, is there an order there? Now, Condor, though, he senses the winds. A lot of these scholars lose courage. Go ahead.
Again. Well, to your illustration, again, they see the storm clouds coming. They feel the wind coming from the approaching storm. They've got their finger in the air and they're seeing which way it's blowing. And having just read the quote in regards to, it really is demanding too much Western credibility to us. Just believe that in a damp climate like Palestine, any sheepskins could have lasted 3,000 years, either above or the ground or below it. You start to see that point. That's the point that they're locking onto. The other things that we laughed at, sure, we can laugh at that now. Dead Sea Scrolls, as you well point out. But back then, in their defense, they couldn't. They thought, well, this is a thing that we can lock onto. And we see from Besant, he says, I believe all the caves in Moab, and they are all damp and earthy. There is not a dry cave in the country.
By the way, that's Condor. That's Condor to Besant, yes. And look. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, no, I was just going, and Condor goes on to, a week after Sayce's assumptions could hardly be conceived yet, published his opinion. Condor would write, a more improbable set of assumptions could hardly be conceived. Yet the difficulty of the great age which is necessary to compose leather, be able to attain without rotting in a damp cave, is even more fatal to this clever forgery.
Yeah.
So, the wind is blowing in a particular direction, and they are moving with it.
Right. And look, I'm going to put, as you see in the story as it unfolds, and we'll talk about this when we get to that point, here is Condor, and I love Condor. I mean, Condor is one of the guys that it's like one of my heroes. But he says, look, paraphrasing, he says, I don't think there's a cave in that whole land that I haven't been in. And some might say, well, there's probably a little bit of truth. I put it this way, he's probably been in more caves than I ever will be, and he's probably been in more caves than most. But let me tell you what he didn't tell is the truth here, because I put him at Qumran later in the book. He's at Qumran. He's standing at the ruins of Khirbet Qumran. He just said, I've been in all these caves. He hadn't been in cave 4. I can tell you that. And he probably was standing right there, and he's saying, there's nothing to see here but a little old cemetery. And, that's what they saw at the time. No way
any leather's going to survive in these caves.
Yeah, nothing going to survive here.
He was standing right there.
Yeah.
And one of the greatest discoveries of all time, and he missed it.
That's right. That's right.
Quite right. So Where are we now? What is Ginsburg up to? All of this is happening, and what's going on with Ginsburg?
Mum's the word. Mum's the word. Ginsburg is steady doing the work. Ginsburg, I think, still believes in the authenticity. Now, later he's going to write letters that says, even to his daughter Ethel, he's going to later say, I knew it was a fake from the get-go. Let me tell you one thing about liars. When the heat gets cranked up, they go all the way back to the beginning. I knew that was fake all along. You ever hear, my grandson tries to scare me sometimes, and every once in a while he really will scare me, and I'll say, that didn't scare me, but it did. Look, these people are on the spot, and they're lying. That's all. Like, I think that Shapira believes Ginsburg believes it's real. If he didn't, I think he would have told the guy who was capable and had already given him a $60,000 a 500-pound stipend for his work. You're not going to lie to the prime minister. So he's steady. Now, he has not said, he hasn't said, but William Simpson actually comments on Ginsburg. I'm just going to read one sentence here. Dr. Ginsburg has been busily engaged. This is William Simpson, who is writing a report. We have copies of all these. Ginsburg has been busily engaged transcribing the characters into their Hebrew equivalents and also in translating the whole into English. This is now nearly completed and will be presented to the trustees of the museum. Dr. Ginsburg has been very reticent while so engaged and has not expressed any opinion as to the genuineness of the manuscript. But he is understood to be making a report on it for the trustees to guide them as to whether they should enter into negotiations with Mr. Shapira for the purchase of the document. Now, so he's still, at the end of this chapter, at the end of this show, which we have now approached very soon, are approaching, he has not yet said it's real, it's fake. Remember, he teased everyone last week by saying, look, it's either, the leather is either going to prove to be 800 some odd BC or 1800 AD. So he's saying, it's either true or false, but rest assured, dear people, that I, the famous Dr. Ginsburg, will be here to guide you and feed you along the way. So I think this is where he's at. He is enjoying the spotlight. Shapira believes that Ginsburg thinks it's real too, I think. And we'll get into why I think that. But he's writing letters home. We know this from the other end of the story. We have reports from his daughter, Miriam Harry, and little daughter of Jerusalem. She's saying that her daddy's writing home saying the sale is fast approaching. You know, they feel confident that they're going to get out from under the status that they've been in their whole life. They're going to be able to, if I were a rich man.
Listen, yeah, that's right. Listen, let me finish that quote from William Simpson, because there's a couple of questions that I have there.
Okay.
He continues and he says, in this report, Dr. Ginsburg will have to express his notions regarding the authenticity, and consequently all interested in biblical matters are waiting anxiously to learn what such an authority will have to say, and whether the learned doctor will date them 800 BC or 1800 AD. The pieces of skin have become much darker since they were first exhibited at the office of the Palestine Exploration Fund. On the few parts of the leather where the characters would have been easily seen, they have now become so darkened that it is with difficulty that they can be made out. That's interesting. So we're to learn, we're to understand that the leather fragments are decaying or in real time, or they're breaking down.
I tell you,
have you read anything else on that?
What we know now, we've been, and we go all the time. By the way, in every one of our videos, we have the link to Tanakh tours. When we go to the Israel Museum and we go see in the scroll of the book, we go look at the Dead Sea Scrolls. Some of our viewers have seen Dead Sea Scrolls. They keep them in a very special place with certain lighting, for this being one of the reasons, so that you don't lose the integrity of the leather. They don't darken any more than they have to, and so forth. But again, they know nothing of this. In fact, you get the image when you read these accounts. They're taking a camel hair brush and brushing alcohol on them, and they don't know. But what we think now is that not only does that leather, when it's got the black sticky, whatever the black sticky substance is on it, whenever they brush on the top of the leather, the letters, because the ink is composed of something which starts to glisten in the light and the liquid as it dries. Now, here's the other thing that does. That leather, that alcohol seeps through and begins to pull up the black.
Yep. Right, of course.
It's just getting darker and darker.
Sense.
Yep.
Yep.
Now, you can still read it. You can still read it in the right conditions. But when we leave this show, understand that from 10 to 4, that in a single display cabinet in the King's Library of the British Museum, from 10 to 4 every day, people are lined up to see it. From the top in society to just regular folks just bringing their families.
Regular folk.
That's right.
Next week, Ross, we're going to be discussing someone whose nose is very much put out of joint, having to share that space with the common folk. And can we give his name now?
Yeah, and by the way, I'll let you give his name, but let me tell you this. This guy, you talk about a dark cloud rising. He, from his present location, is eaten up, I believe, by all the attention that Shapira is getting. He's been an enemy of Shapira since the 1870s in the Moabite affair. He doesn't like him. In some reports, I found a report that Shapira was the one who actually discovered the Moabite Stone, right? And here this person, you tell him who he is, he came out and snatched it right out from under him. Who is this guy? Who is this guy?
He's not even real good buddies with Ginsburg.
No.
As we will find out. His name is Monsieur Charles Clermont Ganneau.
That's right.
And here we Ganneau again. So that is going to be next week as we continue in this infamous saga of Shapira and his 16 leather strips. Right now, Ross, I think we're going to go over to the Yachad for a little bit of Q&A.
That's right. So we have to tell everybody, this is the way we're going to do it from now on. Next Thursday night, same time, same channel, God willing, right here, Ross K. Nichols TV. Jono and I are going to do another infamous, the Shapira saga. Like you said, right now, we're going to tell our viewers goodbye. Those that are members of the Yachad will meet us at HOREB, as we say, and we're going to have some Q&A and some good fun discussion. I'm going to take a break and grab a little shot of coffee. How about you?
I'm going to do the same. And if you want to join the Yachad, all you have to do is to click join under this video. There is that. The conference is full. Unless you're going to smuggle in from the southern border, it's full.
It really is. That's right.
It. There's still room, of course, on the Tanakh tour, TANAKH.tours.com. If you want to join us in February, March, Egypt, Jordan, and Israel will be doing that. The details are on the website. See you next week.
All right. See ya.